Chapter 46. Booker. Fritz invited me to his farm outside of Tyler that week so we could talk more at length. We spent an afternoon on his veranda just talking, and he told me how bad business was. He said that KTVT was upset with the quality of the Saturday night shows, and the syndicates weren't happy with the ratings of world-class championship wrestling. He then told me that Dallas was my home, and if I didn't get involved and try to save world-class, I would be denying myself an opportunity to spend time with my family and always have a territory I can call home. He finished by saying, "You don't really have a choice in this matter. You're going to get the book back, so whatever deal you want is yours to make." He was right. I was a Texan, and I wanted to see the territory thrive once again. I had invested a lot of time and energy into the promotion over the years, and it pained me to see that it had lost a lot of luster. If I take the job, I told him, in addition to my salary, I want 25% ownership in the booking office, plus health benefits for myself and my family. We made the deal that day, and I officially became the booker of World Class. One of the main reasons I took the job was because my wife was having some medical problems, and the insurance his office provided was fabulous. My wife ended up having a full hysterectomy, and I was grateful to have had the insurance, because without it, we would have had to spend $50,000 out of our pocket. Normally, I could handle regular medical procedures, such as taking care of broken legs or toothaches, but this operation was going to be pricey, and Fritz had good insurance that covered everything. As I was leaving his farm that night, Fritz asked me if he should let Bruiser Brody know that I was replacing him, or if I wanted to. I told Fritz that I would handle it, because I wanted to do it right, and didn't want to lose Brody. The next morning, I walked into Bruiser's office, and he was sitting behind his desk. Buck Robley was also there, lying on the couch. Bruiser Brody had brought Buck in to be his assistant, thinking that since he had worked for Bill Watts all those years ago, he would have some great ideas. What Brody didn't realize was that Buck didn't really have any actual booking expertise, because Bill Watts and Grizzly Smith were the ones who did all the real work. When I walked in, Buck looked at me and in an annoyed tone barked, "What do you want?" I just looked at him and said, "I've come here to fire you, Buck." He nearly fell off the couch. "We don't need your services here at World Class anymore," I continued. "You can leave now, and I'll tell Kathy to mail you your check." "What, you're the boss now?" Buck challenged. "I haven't heard anything about this. Either you can take my word for it, or you can ask Fritz or Bronco, but you're definitely fired as of now," I told him. During all this, Bruiser was just looking at me with a bemused smirk on his face, like I was ribbing him, and asked, "What about me?" I softened my tone with him, because he was my friend, and said, "Bruce, you and I will have the same deal we've always had when I was your booker." At that moment, he got a big grin on his face and bellowed, "Thank God this is over." For Bruiser Brody, me replacing him as booker was a breath of fresh air. Brody liked being the booker for the first week, but shortly into his tenure, he realized that the booking job consisted of more than he had dreamed of. He didn't know that it required more than just going to the arenas at night and giving out finishes to the guys. Bruiser had never produced a TV show in his life, but now, each week, he had to go to Fort Worth and do a 90-minute show for KTVT, then produce 4 one-hour shows a month for World Class Championship Wrestling. That's 10 hours of quality television programming a month, on top of booking the entire territory. When he started double booking guys, or leaving them off all week, he then had to deal with the inevitable complaints from his crew. There's a lot more to booking than what most people think. There are promoters and TV stations that need to be contacted, there are salaries to be monitored, and you have to remember who beat who, when they beat them, where they beat them, and how they beat them. If you don't remember simple things like that, you can take a good mid-card guy, have him do one too many jobs, and before you know it, he's nothing but a jobber in the fans' eyes. You've got to pay attention or you can get in a lot of trouble real quick. Booking jobs in big offices like Texas, the Carolinas, Georgia, New York, or Florida were major jobs, and you had to know what you were doing. That's why I was fortunate that I had Jim Barnett and Bill Watts to teach me. Plus, I had good assistants. Meanwhile, Brody had Buck Robley. Buck was really upset about being let go. I had no problems with him personally, but he was going to be of no help to me in the office. Why should I pay him $75 a night to do nothing but hang out in the dressing room and criticize my TV shows? Thankfully, my replacing Bruiser never caused any animosity between us, because he understood he was in over his head. I don't mean this in a bad way, because God knows I love Bruiser Brody, and that he made me a lot of money, but Bruiser was a great piece of in-ring talent, and that's as far as it went. The booking job in Texas had gone full circle. After I first got it in June of 1976, the job went to Ken Mantell in 1983, David Manning and George Scott in 1986, and Bruiser Brody in early 1987. And June of that year, exactly 11 years to the month after I first got it, the book finally came back to me. During the 4 years that I wasn't Booker, Ken Mantell and the others had bastardized what I had spent 7 years of my life building and protecting, and it showed. Fritz needed someone to restore the once prestigious and golden name of World Class, and he felt I was his last hope. I knew that I had a lot of work to do and a big job ahead of me, so I immediately got to work at rebuilding World Class. As soon as I took over the reins as the Booker, my first edict was to clean up the dressing room. People say that Ken Mantell was a very creative and inventive Booker, but I would like someone to tell me what he created other than chaos and disruption. I'll say this point blank, Ken Mantell was the one who allowed the drug situation in World Class to get as bad as it got. Everyone loves to talk about how drug-oriented World Class was, but it was never that way under my watch. Under Ken Mantell's watch is when it really took off. When I first left in January of 1983, after 7 years as the Booker, there were no incidents of drugs, arrests, or deaths in Texas. In the year that I was gone, everything changed, and when I came back in 1984, the place was crazy with drugs. Guys would show up high and drunk, and were still allowed to wrestle. That's because Ken Mantell didn't have the balls to stand up to the guys, and he allowed the drug abuse to continue out of fear of losing his job. I am truly disgusted at what he did to World Class. I know that I have been somewhat overbearing about Ken's inadequacies thus far, and if after reading this book you feel that I come off as bitter, so be it. That is your prerogative. However, the only reason I am spelling everything out for you in regards to Ken Mantell is because I truly feel that he destroyed World Class, and I want you to fully understand why I feel that way. The first thing I did was institute a drug policy, making it clear to everyone and anyone that if they showed up high on my watch, I would send them home, and nobody knew the signs better than me. If anyone on my crew didn't have enough respect for the business or for their opponent to show up straight for their match, then I wouldn't send them out to the ring. I also made it clear that if any of their names got in the newspapers, TV or radio for anything illegal, I would fire them. I was running a family-friendly wrestling promotion with religious overtones. I knew what I was involved with and knew what I was doing, and could not tolerate scandal of any kind. Even the Von Erich boys knew that if Uncle Gary saw them messed up, even if it was from prescription medication, they were in a lot of trouble. So did my drug policy work? Well, think about it this way, no world-class wrestler ever died on my watch, and I booked that territory longer than anyone else. While Uncle Gary was the Booker, there was never even a hint of death, arrest, bad publicity, negativity, or scandal associated with World Class. And why do you think that was? Because Ken Mantell was the one who allowed drugs in the dressing room, not me. It would be very easy for someone to suggest that I should have just come in and cleaned house, firing anyone with a drug problem. How would that have helped them? To shut someone out of your life is not the way. I don't know when you give up on a friend, but I wasn't going to give up on them. Maybe in some ways I was an enabler by keeping them on the payroll, but as far as casting them away? No, I never did that. A couple of times Kerry showed up high, and when he did, I sent him home. I had other guys that showed up like that, and I sent them home, as well. No one was immune. I even talked to the guys who had problems one-on-one, but this time as their boss. I would tell them, these drugs will mess up your life. Trying to get through to an addict can be very frustrating because it's, yes, you're right. I'm going to quit. Tomorrow is a new day. Then, I would hear that they went out and got wasted again. I spent time with all of them talking about the problems they would get into if they continued the way they were going, but there was seemingly nothing I could do for them, because no matter what I tried, nothing worked. They had to want to not be addicts. Because I smoked marijuana on a regular basis, it was very hard for me to talk to the guys about serious drug problems. In their mind, I was the druggie, and I didn't have a leg to stand on. That wasn't a good thing, and I knew that. But I didn't want to be a hypocrite and lie about what I did. Perhaps I should have denied it, but I wasn't that kind of guy, and I couldn't do that. Unfortunately, what I did gave them an opportunity to say, hey, the Booker smokes marijuana. Was there another Booker of my era who was known for smoking pot? Did the reputation of Ole Anderson, Pat Patterson, Dusty Rhodes, George Scott, or Bill Watts as potheads precede them the way it did Gary Hart? No way. Out of all of my peers, I was the black sheep of the bunch. The fact that I smoked pot gave Fritz an easy out whenever I would bring up my concerns about the drug use in World Class, because he could deflect anything I said by using me as some sort of scapegoat, as if my pot smoking was the root cause of all the problems. Fritz would go on and on about what a bad image I set because I smoked marijuana, yet he had no problem calling the chemist to get his boys something so they could work or sleep. I've done an assortment of drugs in my life. There were a few years where I ate hashish and did acid, But I never got into coke, speed, crack, or any synthetic drug. My only real vice is marijuana, although I've never been what anyone would consider a drugged-out stoner. After the shows, I would simply go back to my room or my home, smoke a number, listen to some music, and read a book. That's how I wound down. And if I didn't have that, maybe I wouldn't have been as successful as I was. I know a lot of people look at pot as drugs, but I don't. I see it as something that God put here for us. There's a big difference between an herb and a chemically derived synthetic substance that kills people. This is not a defense, but I could smoke a marijuana cigarette 30 years ago and get buzzed, and smoke the same marijuana cigarette today and get just as buzzed. With pills, over a period of time you have to take more and more to get the same effect. And I'm not trying to have it both ways. There's a huge difference between an addiction to hard drugs and casual pot smoking, because nobody ever died from a pot overdose. It's apples and oranges. With that said, I want to make it clear that by no means am I recommending or endorsing marijuana for anyone else. I'm merely explaining my personal point of view. I would also like to add that if I were a better role model for my crew, then maybe I could have gotten them to clean up their act. I do take responsibility. Maybe if I didn't smoke marijuana, I could have been better at counseling them and making them understand that what they were doing was not good for them. Perhaps someone better educated or more assertive could have done more, but I couldn't. It was a messed up time, and I handled it the best way I could. One of my big initiatives was to improve the talent situation in world class. I inherited Mr. USA Tony Atlas, who George Scott had brought in, and since he was a big name in the industry, I kept him on the roster. Tony Falk was also there with a Boy George gimmick, wrestling as Boy Tony. Whoever came up with it I don't know, but I pray to God it wasn't George Scott. That kind of character wasn't something I wanted in world class. It was too risque, and since I don't think that demeaning homosexuals is a good thing to do, I changed his character to Cowboy Tony Falk. I also had the Fantastics, Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, on my crew. I really like those two guys, especially Tommy. He's actually Buzz Sawyer's half-brother, although not too many people know that. Over the period of a couple of weeks, I noticed that during their matches, they would take turns getting beat up. One night Tommy would get pounded on and Bobby would make the comeback, and then the next night Bobby would sell and Tommy would make the big save. I pulled them aside one night and told them they cannot do their matches that way, stressing, I can't have that. It's too obvious what you're doing. They told me that was the way they did business and continued doing their matches that way. So I simply quit playing their theme song, ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man, every night. About 4 days later they asked why I wasn't playing their entrance music, and I said, I figured I would play your song one night, and then the next night I won't play it. They got the message. All in all though, the Fantasies had a great act, the kids loved them, and I always found them to be a credit to the card. There was a young wrestler I met during my travels in Puerto Rico named Al Perez. Al and I became good buddies and hung out at the pool because Abdullah was always in the casino gambling, and I'm not a gambler. When I became the booker, I contacted Al and brought him into World Class, where I managed him. Al Perez was magnificent. He was the most gifted athlete of anyone I ever managed, and was trained by Carl Gotch, a real hooker and shooter. Al knew how to wrestle, was in fabulous condition, and was the most gorgeous creature that ever stepped into a wrestling ring. We had to beat the women off with a stick. Even though the women loved him, he made a great heel, because he had a mean, vicious streak in him. He was the sweetest guy in the world, unless you flipped his switch. That came across in his work, and the people knew that he was a bad dude. When he became the world-class champion, people believed it. He carried the belt well and made an excellent champion. Perhaps more importantly, though, was that he never got into the drug scene. He didn't even smoke. He might have a beer occasionally, but he took no steroids at all. He was completely and absolutely drug-free. I also brought Don Jardine as the spoiler back. Don and I got together in 1967 and remained together off and on for over 20 years. Aside from being a great friend of mine, he is also godfather to my children, so there is a strong sense of loyalty there. Fritz was really annoyed when I brought the spoiler in, though, groaning, Don Jardine is an old guy. What are you bringing him back for? As long as I'm here, he's here, I told Fritz. He did as much to make you a successful promoter as I did. I truly believe that. Don and I should have more credit than anyone else for making Fritz von Erich a successful promoter. When I said that to him, Fritz stormed out of my office, but 2 days later he came back saying, thanks for being Gary. You're the only one who doesn't kiss my ass. Granted, by 1987 Don wasn't the spoiler of old, and he couldn't walk the ropes anymore, but he was a Texas legend and deserved to be on the roster. I brought other established names in like Terry Taylor and the Iron Sheik to add some star power to the cards. A couple of the new, young faces I recruited were Ted Arcidi and Eric Embry. Not only did Eric put asses in the seats, but he was also very good in the office, helping out with the daily chores. Plus, when I would be away from home, Eric would babysit my kids, because my wife was in the hospital during this time. Eric was so good in the ring that I even instituted a light heavyweight title for him to defend. There was a young wrestler in the area named Mark Calloway who was looking to get a break. He was a big kid, and I gave him as many dates as I could, because he was just starting out. Mark had great potential though, and later went to the WWF as The Undertaker. The Spoiler was one of Mark's idols. What you see in The Undertaker is a glimpse of what the Spoiler was. Of course, Don had a different style than Mark Calloway, but that was the image, a big, agile guy that could walk on the ropes and use the ropes for phenomenal things. In his day, the Spoiler could step on the center rope, jump backwards, make a full turn in the air and drop a knee across his opponent's throat. He was unbelievable. Some other talent I brought in was Steve and Sean Simpson from South Africa. The Simpson boys were marvelous children, and they looked like the heavy metal hair bands of the time. The Simpson brothers became a very important part of my crew, and like Al Perez, they were totally drug-free, and that included aspirins. Unfortunately, in one of his matches, Steve went diving into the turnbuckle head first, and detached his retina. I don't know if he lost total sight, but it was very serious. Their father, Sam Cohen, had a wrestling company of his own in South Africa, and he eventually contacted me looking to get some talent. I talked to Mark Calloway, and he told me he would be interested in going, so I made a deal with Sam that I thought was fair, $700 a week for 3 months. Sam balked, and wanted to pay $300 a week. I fought to get Mark more money, and we finally settled for $600. Mark felt he should have gotten a lot more, but that's all I could get him. A few days later, Brad and Bart Batten told me that they had made a deal with Sam and were going to South Africa. I asked what they were being paid, and they said $300 a week. Sam came to me, gloating, "You said I couldn't get any guys for $300. I just rolled my eyes and said, "Well, you won't get any guys from me at that price." The world-class roster was really shaping up, and even though the Von Erichs, the Spoiler, Tim Brooks, Bruiser Brody, and Abdullah the Butcher had been in Texas for years, I truly feel that I brought in some new, good, young faces who the fans really took to.